Hey everyone, how you doing? I'm Fuzz, and welcome to another edition of Back to Basics. This is a series where I discuss topics of interest to those who are new to collecting movies on physical media. And today I'm going to be talking about aspect ratios, which is really the kind of topic that this series was created for. The original idea behind Back to Basics was to explore information that is often considered common knowledge among many collectors and movie enthusiasts, but yet those who are new to collecting movies may not necessarily be aware of or up to speed on. So that's why I call it Back to Basics, because I'm tackling basic foundational information that experienced collectors are likely to be very familiar with, but some new collectors may not be as familiar with. And I think one of the more common questions asked with regard to this topic when people are new to collecting movies is this, and I'm going to use some layman's terminology here, but a common question is, why do some movies that I play have those black bars on the top and bottom of the image, but other movies fill up my entire screen and don't have those black bars? And then, of course, that usually prompts a follow-up question. Is there anything I can do about it? And for the most part, usually the short answer is no. And that's because the aspect ratio is largely a creative choice that's made by the filmmakers. It's not something that we really have a whole lot of control over, right? That's something that the director chooses for the film. Now, there are some movie releases out there that will give you the option of viewing more than one aspect ratio for that movie, but that doesn't happen all that often, at least not with physical media. Occasionally it happens, most recently I can think of the Chronicles of Riddick, the Arrow Video 4K release of the Chronicles of Riddick. They actually did give you the option of viewing the film in two different aspect ratios, but I wouldn't call that necessarily very common. It happens from time to time with certain releases, but it's not really all that common with physical media. Usually, you just get whatever aspect ratio the director has chosen for the film. So today I've got a couple articles that I wanted to share and go over with you guys that I think really do a good job of explaining how aspect ratios work and why filmmakers make the choices they do with them. So without any further ado, let's get right into it and rock this. Okay, so I'm going to be referencing two different articles for this video, and I've included links to each of them in the description below. The second article I'm really using more for just visual aids and examples, but most of the substance for this video is coming from this first article. And let's go ahead and switch over to my other screen here. This article is from Wired.com, and it's a few years old, but this is an evergreen topic. It's not exactly a time-sensitive topic, and I thought this was a good article. I thought it had some good stuff in it. So the title of the article: What are aspect ratios and why do they matter? It's easier than ever to see movies in different sizes and shapes, but how much does that affect the art of the film? And we'll go ahead and scroll down here. Got your camera there, and let's get into the meat of it here. You might not spend much time thinking about the shape of the movies you watch, but everyone from filmmakers to streaming services are paying more attention than ever. Will the next movie you watch use the taller IMAX enhanced aspect ratio? Will it be ultra wide or almost square? And more importantly, why would a director or studio choose to change the shape a movie is presented in? Read on to learn more. Okay, we don't need that paragraph. That's just a fluff paragraph. Let's get down here to the next one. What's in the frame? In simplest terms, the aspect ratio of a movie is how wide the frame of the movie is versus how tall it is, usually expressed as a ratio. So put another way, the aspect ratio of a movie is how wide the frame is relative to how tall it is, right? How wide the frame is relative to how tall it is. For example, most TVs and computer monitors are 1.77 to 1, and it's usually rounded up to 1.78 to 1, I think, but more often expressed on consumer packaging as 16 by 9. That is our standard TV screen size these days. Which means the screen itself is 1.77 times as wide as it is tall. The higher the first number in this ratio is, the wider the screen will be. This might sound like arcane data that only film nerds need to care about, and to a certain extent, it is. But things are becoming a bit blurrier when it comes to standard aspect ratios for content. When filmmakers used to start shooting a movie, they would often choose what aspect ratio they were going to shoot in, and that was that. But recently, streaming services from YouTube to Disney Plus have made it possible to show videos in a wider range of aspect ratios, sometimes without distracting black bars. In some cases, you can even choose for yourself which version to watch. So let's examine why filmmakers choose to shoot in different ratios, and when you, as the viewer, might prefer one version over the other. And pardon the ads, by the way. I know that's a little bit annoying, but that's apparently this site likes to inundate its viewers with tons of ads. All right, so composing shots. Deciding how to compose a shot, where actors go in a frame, what parts of the environment to show, what elements are or are not in focus, is a complicated and creative field. But before any of those decisions can be made, the shape of the frame comes first. And it's a more important decision than it might seem. For example, The Avengers often features the Hulk in the same frame as the much smaller Black Widow. If that movie were shot in the typical 2.39 that many theatrical movies use, it would be difficult to fit both of these characters in the frame properly. So instead, the movie was shot using a 1.85 to 1 aspect ratio, another common but relatively taller ratio, allowing more vertical space. You can see the difference in the graphic below, and of course there is no graphic here below, so I'm just going to skip past the rest of that paragraph because it's just describing a graphic that doesn't exist. Man, look at these ads. They're all over. As director Scott Derrickson explained to Wired, taller frames can have a powerful impact when it comes to larger-than-life stories. The extreme top and bottom of IMAX theatrical creates an amazing visceral experience where the aesthetics of the frame are replaced by an image so vast that you are basically inside the frame. In my experience, this is exceptionally good for action and the only way I like to view 3D. All right, so that's his take there. And this is part of the reason Zack Snyder chose to use an extremely tall 1.33 to 1 aspect ratio. That's like Wizard of Oz, right? That's 4:3, like our old TV screens back in the 90s and the 80s, right? Before the 2000s and before we got the 16:9 screens. Closer to old school televisions, just like I said, to emphasize the weighty height of superheroes like Batman or Superman as he's flying. In such a tall but less wide frame, you can fit a full human standing up in a dramatic pose with much less empty space on the sides, which would have been particularly impressive on IMAX screens. And here's the catch, though. Hang on, let me get it in the frame here. However, the movie was adapted to a more traditional widescreen format for the theatrical release. They're talking about the Snyder Cut here, right? The fabled Snyder Cut of Justice League was eventually released in its full 1.33 to 1 glory, but mostly viewed on TV screens that are much wider, leaving black bars on the sides. This highlights the problem filmmakers face when choosing what aspect ratio to film in. They can have an ideal viewing experience in mind while shooting the movie, but many, in some cases even most, people who ever watch their work will see it in an entirely different context. More than likely, their TVs at home. All right, let's keep going here. The cinematic look. There's another reason to choose a specific aspect ratio. The cinematic look. Ask 10 filmmakers what makes something look quote-unquote cinematic, and you'll get 11 different answers. But at least some of them will likely mention ultra-wide frames. There's a lot more to it than that, but Derrickson explained, I generally prefer the 2.40 to 1 aspect ratio for subjective reasons. The composition feels more cinematic to me, with its emphasis on width of space and the way it forces close-ups to be off-center. We all have subconscious associations with the movies we grew up watching that collectively make things feel like a movie. And ultra-wide aspect ratios like 2.4 to 1 have been the almost exclusive domain of movies for decades. TVs eventually migrated to the now common 1.77 to 1 standard. I don't know why he keeps putting 1.77 to 1. It's usually listed as 1.78 to 1. So I don't know, obviously they round up there, but he chose not to for some reason, this author. TVs eventually migrated to the now common 1.78 to 1 standard. But if you remember watching anything that was ultra wide, it was probably a movie. So your brain starts to associate that shape with cinema, even from a very young age. This isn't just a Pavlovian association. As with any aspect ratio, there are specific benefits to this ultra-wide frame. Wide shots of sprawling landscapes feel even more grand. For example, in Blade Runner, shots of the dystopian Los Angeles from in the far distant future of 2019 feel as massive as if you were looking out over the actual city. The red bars show, once again, they're referencing an image here that they didn't actually include in this article. It says the red bars show how much of the frame would be cut off if it were more chip. It's, we don't need that. I've got some other images I'm going to show you here in a few minutes. Let's move on. Yeah, it's weird. They keep referencing these pictures or images in this article, but they didn't actually include the images anywhere. All right. So, however, it's not just wide shots that can benefit from this wide frame. I also really love the way extreme close-ups look in 2.40, Derrickson explained. You usually have to crop the hairline of the actor or actress, but there is great power in how those extreme close-ups work. Derrickson offered the example of Jack Nicholson's iconic scene in A Few Good Men. Initially, Nicholson is framed widely enough so that you can see the top of his head. But as soon as the camera cuts to him to deliver that line, you can't handle the truth. The shot is close enough to cut off the top of his head. It draws the focus to his intense facial expressions. As an added bonus, the harsh straight line across his forehead, where it meets the edge of the frame, emphasizes the parallel horizontal lines of his eyebrows, his shoulders, and even his pursed lips. In the wider shot, you can see the curvature of his head. But in this laser focus shot, Nicholson's framing is rigid and sharp to accentuate his harsh lines. And then once again, they're referencing images here that don't exist here in this particular article that I'm reading. But like every other filmmaking term, I'll go down here and cut this off here. Like every other filmmaking tool, the aspect ratio a director chooses can have a dramatic effect on the feel of the movie. And that's the key point here, right? Let's see what else we got here. Okay, continuing on here with changing shapes. For a lot of film history, picking an aspect ratio was a one-and-done choice. The whole movie had to be distributed in a single-size frame, even if some movies were shot with multiple aspect ratios in mind for different edits, for, say, theatrical and home distribution. But more recently, it's become fairly common to see movies that change aspect ratios, or even let the viewer decide. That's not really the case with physical media, to be honest. I mean, you don't really see that as much with physical media. That's more in streaming, like Disney Plus, right? I don't even know how common it is in streaming because I don't really stream much, because streaming quality is dog shit. I don't like streaming. I don't like to stream because it looks like crap to my eyes, at least relative to, watching a 4K disc. You never get the full meal deal experience watching a stream compared to a disc, right? So, I'm not, most of what I'm talking about here today, I'm applying it specifically to physical media here. I'm not necessarily talking about streaming because, streaming is not what we cover here, right? That's not our groove here in Fuzzland. All right, let me continue on here. Where was I? The first film I remember seeing that toggled between 2.40 and 1.9 in IMAX was The Dark Knight, Derrickson said. In that movie, many of the biggest action scenes were shot with a much taller aspect ratio, allowing more vertical space within that frame. And that's actually true on the disc too. I say that that's usually just for streaming, but that's actually true on the disc too. That's one thing that's cool about Nolan. He does his shifting aspect ratios with his film. In The Dark Knight, it's awesome when they do it. At least I think it's cool. But in that movie, many of the biggest action scenes were shot with a much taller aspect ratio, allowing more vertical space within the frame. In the theater, the film switched between them, often without audiences or even professionals noticing. What was remarkable was that I didn't even notice the shift because the 2.40 on that enormous screen was still so large. And like I said, that's on the 4K discs as well, right? That has continued. That's not just in the theater. That was actually on the 4K disc too. And I love that about Nolan's work, right? When he does that. Derrickson's own superhero movie, Doctor Strange, used a similar technique for many of its action scenes. While Derrickson initially clarified on Twitter that IMAX scenes weren't shot with home viewing in mind, he told me, "I've recently watched the IMAX 3D version on my 55-inch TV screen, and I think the switch is much more noticeable. But the power of opening up the frame and giving the home viewer a significantly larger image for the major set pieces works well." And I wholeheartedly agree with that. It's awesome when it happens. Again, when you watch, I think Mission Impossible, one of the Mission Impossibles does that too. Is it Fallout? I think Fallout does some shifting aspect ratios. You don't see that many people working with multiple aspect ratios in their films, but you do see it from time to time. Continuing on here, more movies are also experimenting with uncommon aspect ratios. Joel Coen's The Tragedy of Macbeth is shot in black and white in a tall 1.33 to 1 aspect ratio. And the 2019 film The Lighthouse, directed by Robert Eggers, went even taller with a ratio of 1.19 to 1. That is crazy. To evoke the classic look of box cameras from the 1890s. What a trip. I mean, I love that kind of art. That gives you, Eggers is a prime example of really using the aspect ratio as in an artsy way to get a certain effect, right? And I don't know if I haven't seen The Lighthouse, so I can't really comment on it. But I don't know how I'd feel about that particular aspect ratio, to be honest. That's a little too tall in my view. But I'm not even the biggest fan of 1.33 to 1. But that's kind of crazy. But whatever, that's Eggers. He's experimenting and getting in touch with his inner art house child. Now that it's easier than ever for films to be shot and distributed in a variety of aspect ratios, you might find yourself watching movies that are more shaped around the story being told rather than the frame they're limited to. You might even have some agency in that choice. And I think that's the end of this article. Yeah, that's it there. So I just thought that was a decent article that did a really good job of explaining how aspect ratios work. Now, I do have another article here I want to go over to real quick here. This is from like a film school type website, nofilmschool.com. I'm not familiar with it because I didn't go to film school. I don't know anything about this stuff. But it's a cinematic aspect ratio guide for every filmmaker. And like I said, there are links in the description for each of these articles if you want to check them out later on. How can the aspect ratio of your film or TV show contribute to your story? And I'm not going to get into reading this too much. We'll read a little bit of it here. Whether you're watching a show on your iPhone, setting up your new 70-inch 4K television, or sitting your butt in a theater, aspect ratio matters. The aspect ratio refers to the size of the image displayed on your screen. While this sounds technical, aspect ratios can help storytellers add another layer to their repertoire. Also, for independent filmmakers and huge studio directors, the right aspect ratio can attract more viewers and create a buzz around your film or TV show. Now, obviously this is directed towards filmmakers themselves, but the main reason I wanted to bring up this article is it actually has some visual aids here that I think might be kind of handy here to kind of show you what's what here and kind of show you how these different aspect ratios work relative to each other. By the way, if you're enjoying the content on this channel, do me a favor and please consider subscribing to the channel. And if you do, don't forget to activate that notification bell as well so you can be alerted whenever I'm posting videos that you might be interested in. Also, don't forget to like the video and maybe even drop a comment as well. The YouTube algorithm really likes that, and it really helps with the channel's visibility. Thanks so much for your support. I really appreciate it. All right, and this site has a shitload of ads all over it, so just try to bear with me on that. But let's go through a few of these aspect ratios here, for examples. So we've got 1.33 to 1, or 4:3. That's what our TVs used to be, right? That used to be the size of our TVs back before the 2000s. And 1.33 to 1, that was used for titles like The Wizard of Oz. Right? That's 1.33 to 1. That was kind of the standard earlier on, many years ago. But Zack Snyder revived it, as we've talked about with Justice League, the Snyder cut of Justice League, the 4-hour Justice League. It is in the same aspect ratio as Wizard of Oz. So you do get those black bars on either side of the image. Rather than being on the top and the bottom, they end up on the side. And they're fairly thick in that aspect ratio. All right, let's look at some others here. Let me get my screen over here. So 1.66 to 1. Now that's one you don't see a whole lot of these days, right? I don't know that how many movies have ever been shot using 1.66 to 1. I mean, I know there've been quite a few, but like relative to these other aspect ratios, I don't think there are as many. You don't come across that one very often. We were talking about Robert Eggers a moment ago. The Witch, that was shot in 1.66 to 1, right? And you still get the black bars on the sides of the image, but they're not as thick as they would be if it were 1.33 to 1, right? So The Witch is an example of one that was shot in 1.66 to 1. Also, Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange, another example of a movie that was shot in 1.66 to 1. In fact, he may have done that with several of his films. I'll be the first to admit I haven't really delved in and looked into all of Stanley Kubrick's films to see what the aspect ratio is on every film, but there were a couple there that I was aware of. All right, so let me get my image back up here. Let's move on to 1.78 to 1. Now that one, that will fill up the entirety of your 16:9 screen. That is exactly the size of your 16:9 screen. So if you ever see a movie that's got that aspect ratio, yeah, that's a cool one. That'll fill up your screen with no black margins on the sides or the tops or bottoms. It's like a perfect fit, right? And that's why the aspect ratios look the way they do. Right? I mean, if you wanted the aspect ratio to fit perfectly on the screen, then the screen size has to be the same aspect ratio as what the movie was shot in. And of course, we primarily use the 16:9 standard for our TVs these days. But 1.78 to 1, that is not uncommon. But what's even more common is 1.85 to 1. So that is very close to 1.78 to 1. 1.85 to 1 will fill up almost the entirety of your screen. It does look like it's filling up the whole screen. You get very, very thin, narrow margins on the top and the bottom. You may not even notice those black margins on the top and bottom at first because they're so thin. They're really not that big at all. As you can see, there's not a whole lot of difference here between 1.78 and 1.85, right? All right, let's keep going here. Scope aspect ratio, that's 2.39 to 1. That is that very common looking cinematic aspect ratio, right? Where you do have the black margins on the top and the bottom of the screen when you're watching it on a 16:9 screen. So yeah, you're going to see that. That's very, very common. Not much you can really do about that, but I've actually come to really appreciate that aspect ratio. And I mean, it's not like I ever really didn't like it. It's just that maybe I wasn't quite as fond of it years ago as I've become in recent years. I love that kind of prestigious cinematic look that this aspect ratio kind of provides. It gives that feeling of a more higher end, more prestigious looking film. So yeah, I've come to really dig it here. All right, now there's an ultra wide one here. This is one you don't see a whole lot of these days, but here's an example of a movie that uses 2.75 to 1. It's actually like 2.76 to 1. Again, it's another one of those rounding up type deals, I think. Ben-Hur. This may have even been one of the first movies to use that aspect ratio. I'm certainly no expert on this stuff, so I don't know for sure. But Ben-Hur, yeah, this is ultra wide, and when you watch it, oh man, the black margins, the black bars, they're huge. They feel like they take up like half the screen, if not more. I mean, it's a really, really thin image for Ben-Hur, and but it looks cool. It's extremely cinematic. It looks great, but yeah, it's if you get a movie like this and you're expecting it to fill up the entirety of your screen, you're definitely going to be in for a disappointment because it does not do that with an aspect ratio like this. I mean, you would need to have a TV or a screen that conforms to that aspect ratio, that is the same size as that and shape as that aspect ratio, which 2.76 to 1. So yeah, Ben-Hur, you get some serious black bars with that one. All right, and the rest of this article, I believe, just talks a little bit more about the history of the cinematic aspect ratio history. I'll let you guys read that one later if you want to learn more about the cinematic history. I'm not going to go over all of this right now, but there's lots of good stuff here. You got some screenshots, a little bit of film history. But I'll let you guys check this out on your own. It does go into a little bit more detail here than I've gone in this video. I just wanted to give you guys the basic rundown of what the deal is with aspect ratios. So I don't think, there's just a lot of ads here. Let's get out of this. Okay, so that about wraps it up for my my latest installment of Back to Basics on the topic of aspect ratios. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. What did you think of this video? Did you find it helpful at all? I always love chatting with you guys and hearing your feedback, so make sure you drop me a comment down below. Also, don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Thank you so much for watching today, guys. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you soon.